looks like we have a couple of folks joined already. I'll just give another minute before we get started. All right, everyone loves a little bit of Otis Redding and talking about security, a different kind of security I think that he's singing about than what we're going to talk about today and what we all basically do, most of us. But let's get started. Folks that come later can always catch up and watch the recording, and like to be on time for those that are on time. So welcome to Delivering Effective Tabletop Exercises. My name is Mike Wilkes, and I am here presenting on behalf of the security agency. We are a new startup, and we are founded by a company that has been in the business of doing security, physical security, for over 60 years, and it's 3 generations, the Johnson Security Bureau. And so I've been tasked, and it is my honor and privilege to carry forward that dedication and effort and diligence and work into the cybersecurity space, and to build up our cybersecurity practices and offerings. So that's a little bit about who we are. You can see our website, of course, at thesecurityagencyusa.com. Let's see, in the chat. I'm an AI assistant. Yeah, so Juan is going to be able to record, take notes, and we'll have a transcript for the recording and playback later. So one of the things that I wanted to prep you for is that we have a special guest. So we put together this webinar because I wanted to share some of my experience and tips and tricks on how to deliver a good and effective tabletop exercise. And it turns out Juan was able to secure the attention and participation of a great CISO. And that is the inestimable and amazing Bret Arsenault. And so he should be joining us in a minute or two. And so before I get into the actual presentation, I thought I would talk a little bit about Bret. So he's been the CISO at Microsoft for the last, 14 years, I think, right? Is that right, Juan?
Yes, he has, yeah. He has taken that new role as of a couple of weeks ago. I can show you explain what that is.
Yeah, so he's going to be a global security advisor now, which I think is going to entail some outward-facing activities. Although, when you think about it, CISOs are really diplomats. We need to work with every single team within a company, across disciplines, across departments, because everyone is within our remit, because everyone can be investigated as an insider risk. Everyone can be the source of a erroneous, hapless click that can turn into a ransomware event or some other type of malware attack or business email compromise. And we have to work with our vendors, right? Our third-party vendors that provide services to us. And we have to answer questions from our customers. And so I like to think of us as diplomats, and that we have to exert influence on the world, because not everyone reports to us, right? If we're lucky, we have a team, a dedicated team that is able to build and run the security operations and the program and various projects and initiatives to improve the security posture of our organizations. But it's useful to, I think, cast it in that characteristic of influence. And one of the things that's most influential, of course, is to be able to get executive support. And I mean like senior executive leadership team and the board of directors. And so when I think about effective tabletop exercise, I often think about providing them for the board and to get resource allocation from the board when you go through maybe a ransomware scenario or a disaster even. It doesn't have to be a cyber event, right? It could be a tornado, earthquake, fire, all sorts of things can cause disruptions that in general security officers are going to be responsible for or at least involved in. Larger organizations may actually have a business continuity director or disaster recovery executive who takes care of doing these types of exercises for natural events and also other unexpected disasters like data center fires or outages of network providers. But anyway, delivering tabletop exercises is, I think, a really key way to get executive buy-in, to get some of the resources that we need as delivery specialists, as risk management folks, to be able to make sure that we have what we need to protect the organization and its assets, the customer data, employee data, and of course, continue to deliver good value to shareholders. That's one of the things that I think CISOs can spend a little bit more time thinking about is the business, and not just the vulnerabilities and the risks and the scores and patching and vulnerabilities, but to think about the business and how we can be part of a strategic enabler, basically a differentiator for a company. So let's see. I don't see. Bret having joined yet, but I can certainly move on to the second slide and talk a little bit about what this presentation is going to contain once we start it. So what is a tabletop exercise? Essentially, it's a tailored live session designed to help board directors and executive leadership teams come up to speed on some of the things that they can be expected to discuss and understand about incident response and various scenarios. And so it's a tabletop because it's a paper-based exercise. Although in some cases you can actually go through the motions of notifying teams and creating tickets and going through the actual process in your incident response plan, just to make sure everyone knows what those steps are and how to do those things. But by and large, it's going to be a what-if scenario, sitting around a table talking with people that should be involved in the scenario that you're planning. And oftentimes, I think it makes sense to have a third party deliver your first tabletop exercise if you've never done one before, because there's a bit of a skill and practice that can be built up. And once you've seen it done well by a third party, then I think it makes sense to try to do mini tabletops with your internal teams, maybe some of the individual contributors, and to work up that capability to make it a meaningful and positive experience for everyone. You don't want to disappoint on that first tabletop because then it can become a little bit less attractive in the future. It looks like Bret's here. Hello, Bret.
Just learning how to use the Zoom buttons. I didn't know this product existed, so.
Right. Well, I appreciate the humor and the accommodation. So let me stop my share for a second and let's just look at the Hollywood squares. So Bret, I was just talking a little bit about why tabletops are useful for getting resources for your security program and why putting them on for an executive audience instead of just the individual contributors on the IT or the security and incident response team can be helpful, right? So that you can get some of that support and sponsorship that you might need. So let me give you the floor. If you have anything you wanted to share, I think I can turn on, there's a security setting here. Yeah, you're allowed to share your screen if you wanted to give us a few points. But I thought it'd be really great for the folks here. Number one, thank you for joining. It's really an honor to have you here and to share a little bit of your experience about tabletops and executive audiences and talking to boards.
That's really good. I wasn't going to share content. I mean, I have a couple slides, but I don't think I'll use them.
Okay.
Just because people get really tired of Microsoft and PowerPoint. So, yeah, maybe a little bit of history. Sorry for my amazing background. I'm at an offsite today, and I just wanted to call in just to say thank you. When I took the role, so for those of you who don't know me, I've been at the company too long. I think a long time, 34 years, and I've been a CISO here for 14. When I took this role, I've always believed in sphere of influence is more important than span of control. But the one thing I did say had to report to me was crisis response and business continuity, because I felt our ability to respond was going to be more important in the public eye. Like if you look at the issues that happen, it's usually not what caused it, and because you'll always fix the issue that it might be. But like you look at British Petroleum or any other thing, and it's really how do you respond in the public eye? And so how we responded was really important to me. So I took that on. Now it seemed like a really good idea 14 years ago. It became a fairly common industry trend. About 33% of CISOs have that reporting to them in the Fortune 500, which wasn't the case that a while ago. But uh, had I known the pandemic was going to happen, I may have thought differently. I mean, that certainly changed a lot. But so the key for us, though, when we did that, was building a true all all event response plan and tabletop exercises. And also, and so I hired a very amazing PhD in social sciences and civil unrest that focused on risk management. And like what you were just saying before, like the first things was how do you do tabletop exercises in a very narrow specific area, because otherwise it becomes chaos in the room, and you need to get them used to the muscle of, basically it comes down to who gets to make what decisions, who's accountable for those decisions, and then how do you make those decisions, particularly under a time of crisis, right? Because you can do tabletop for non-crisis stuff. I just did some last week, but when you're thinking about any kind of crisis, how do you do that? And so we built our playbooks to be an all hazards approach. And so just super simply, we have four types of hazards, right? Like there's planful, which is weather related as an example, unplanful, earthquake as an example, operational, which is where cyber fits in, and then pandemic. And those are the four things that this playbook runs. Now we have a couple minor specialty playbooks like on ransomware or whatever else, but they're super minor. And the book is no more than 80 pages by design. It's not a FEMA playbook. I don't agree with personally, so I'm going to be very clear on my view. It doesn't mean it's the right view, but an 800 playbook that tries to counter everything never, ever, ever succeeds in a real crisis. And so having a playbook that gives great guidelines and make sure that people are making the right decisions and checking off the right things, like did you check to the comms people, and is principally based, tends to scale better. So the playbook for ransomware is actually pretty darn similar to the playbook we would run for an earthquake, with a few minor caveats. So there's an addendum for that. And so I'd say, one, getting that all hazards approach was super helpful. Two, getting your principles down. So for us, we really only had three, and getting leadership to agree on this in a narrow case first and then expand it across business units is really important. So for us, it was put life safety above all else, which seems really obvious, but even in a cyber incident, it is real for us, right? Protect the customer. And there's arguments again from HR. No, we should talk to our employees first. I said, nope, employees are third. And everyone agreed to it. And the process of getting everyone to agree to it so that there's buy-in was super important. So we had 7: life safety first, customer second, protect Microsoft third. And then there's these 4 add-ons: abide by all legal contractual obligations, communicate facts often, which seems obvious, but like people forget that. Prepare for the worst case scenario in a crisis event, and then recognize global and community impacts. Like, because it's very easy to act locally when it's a local incident. So that simplified view is how we've thought about the problem and how we've run it for a long time. And we tabletop, and these things are on everywhere we are, that we make sure we're using these guiding principles, right? And so, and then to your point, like I just finished our ransomware tabletop exercise with our SLT, and we had, to your point, we bring an independent party to do it, because one is they then assess us, and then we take that assessment to the board and explain. And so one, it's very easy. You can say, well, wow, you guys do so many tabletops. Why would you have somebody from the outside do it? But I think having one independent endorsement is good publicly. And two, it just gives you the right perspective, which is not to be so close to the sea. And so you can see the forest for the trees. And frankly, it's also, they're really assessing for us, our CEO and his leadership team. And that coming from them versus me has a very different impact. And I impact it. Like I'll tell them where I agree or don't agree, and they don't change their report, but like we have a good, healthy conversation. And they give us very clear areas that we want to go work on and come back and improve. So we added one section for ransomware, how to deal with ransomware. So I'll stop there. Does that make sense, Mike?
Yeah, that's a great outline. I can't wait to type up the notes because you rattled off that list
I
like it's
can send you a
ingrained
couple.
in your.
Yeah, I can send you. We share some section, but I can send you the slides for any of the people on here too if you want. I'm happy to send it to you, so you don't have to type it up.
Right. One of the things that you mentioned though was often, and I think often, your mileage may vary, right? People can use that word differently or interpret it differently. The U.S., I think, Air Force says that they continuously monitor, the cybersecurity of their bases, and they perform a pen test every 3 years. So for them, that's continuous, right? So what value of often do you think is useful? I mean, I think more than once a day is a good frequency for communication if it is a customer impacting, large scale incident, right?
Yeah, it could be way more than that, depending on like how big and how broad the impact is, right? And so, and then and then again, what are you communicating to? So there's communicating, like I think there's communicating to the stakeholders inside the team. So the teams that are doing either in this case, like you're obviously doing containment and remediation work, and that's one set of communication pass. And then there's communicating externally, and that's always the tricky part, right? Is when do you communicate? Like we had the issue where an internal communication went outside on something related to the current crisis in Israel. And I remember when the person was writing it, and I'm like, oh man, you do not want to send that at this. You just need to wait. This is one where you want to wait 2 hours because what seems like the right statement, and it's the environment today, the socio-political environment today is so much more contested that what seems like a benign statement can be taken incorrectly. So that's probably always the tension. And that, to me, honestly, in any tabletop exercise, is who gets to make what decision on external comms. And also, at least in my environment, and I've done this for probably 100 different boards around the world, the fact that especially type A personalities, like you can't solve the problem. Like really at the end of the day, there's only 3 decisions a leadership team can actually make in these scenarios, which is what and who's going to communicate what and when, which your CMO or your comms person helps. When do you use your CEO voice or board voice, right? And then allocation of resources. But that's really all. The rest of it is people just doing the work that has to happen. So like, do we need to put more resources here to clean up? Do we agree we're going to not just fly families out of an area, but we're going to fly their grandparents, their children, their cousins, their pets. And it seems stupid, but that's a really hard conversation. Like we had to do that in Puerto Rico, and that was a really tough conversation. And so those are all conversations so that you can have ahead of time, which most of those we had. So you're not debating those before you get there, so that you're really only having debates on things you couldn't plan for. Like, are we going to build our own inoculation center for COVID? Right?
Yeah.
Which is there was no playbook was going to prepare us for that. But will we give it to just employees or the community? That one we did already have answers to.
I think that's a key point, and I'm going to talk about it in a minute, but you bring it up now, so it's good to mention. One of the things I think is most useful for the executive team is to realize there's so much that you can do left of boom, right? If
Yeah.
boom is when the bad thing happens.
Yep.
And you're talking about like writing a press release for an incident before the incident so that you have legal and outside counsel and you have all an HR, maybe everyone has been involved in drafting that document. So you have it ready to go. And all you have to do is change the dates and maybe one of the specifics, right?
Yeah, I think we refer to that as a pre-mortem when we do those, and then to your said, there's sort of a cadre of communications that we have, and it's interesting. Do you trust the communications team that they have them, or do you review them all as an LT? And I think it depends on the company and the culture, but I totally agree with you. Most of the things that you end up writing are, like you said, basically, because many of the things you do publicly are holding statements anyway, right? They're not meant to be solution statements. And so this is what we're looking into, here's when we'll get back to you, et cetera. But I totally agree. If you're writing them you really should just be doing editorializing, not writing from scratch. There's honestly no excuse to be in that situation. For most things, like I said, no one was like all the pandemic planning I did. Like I remember being on stage and we were training people how to properly take off masks and rubber gloves because people don't know how to do it. And so they end up getting themselves contaminated. And so like I remember doing the training on that, I don't know, 9 years ago. But we were thinking avian flu. We were thinking even pandemic, we weren't thinking at the scale that happened with COVID, right? But as broad as we thought, avian might be, we never thought every country, every part of the world, everything, every single thing impacted. So,
Yeah,
that's a,
I've often joked that we've all been living in a tabletop exercise for the last 3 years.
well,
Because when else would you have been like, everyone work from home, discuss, right?
well,
That's
it's
the only time it
interesting.
would have been up.
Yeah, no, it's interesting you bring that up though, Mike, honestly, because one of the things I got dinged on from audit and which I like, this is that risk acceptance thing was, during COVID, they said you didn't run tabletop exercise. And I go, damn straight I didn't. We were doing them every day. And so like, there's no reason to go do that. There was no reason to add that on during that time frame. And when I say we weren't doing tabletops, we have specific education and training and awareness that we do around tabletopping and crisis for all the area leads, because we have area crisis and then local crisis and then enterprise crisis. And we said, yeah, we risk accepted that. We think that we're living it every day, so we don't have to. But as soon as it was over, we went right back to tabletop. We went right back to the training and all the other stuff we did. And again, brought an independent party to validate our ransomware playbook as an example, which I thought was the playlist on that. The hardest thing for me to get the leadership team to do, honestly, in my lessons learned, was letting me kill people in the exercises. Right. Well, because you say in there, like we said, like the number one thing is life safety. And for manufacturing and other things, it's not as common, but obviously for a company like ours, we think a lot of it will be in the operational space. And so in one of the exercises, even my CEO said, no, you can't kill anyone in the exercise. I had 2 people disappear that were critical to the exercise. And so I got to sneak it in anyway. And it was actually really fascinating to watch how they handled it. Like, do you really think life safety is first? Because you're missing 2 people right now. And
Yeah,
so,
or just chain of command, and to surface that there's no formal delegation for a decision maker. One of my favorite tricks, and
well, who are
this
you going to
is
notify, right? Like on the
is
life safety, 2 people are missing. When do you tell their family?
yeah.
And to your point, what's a chain of command on who's going to make that determination? I think that's brilliant, brilliant.
One of the things I've done is I'll take whoever's sort of leading the exercise, being dominant, like you said, like the type A personality, and sometimes that might be the CISO, right, or the CTO, and I'll say, okay, you're off the table. Your life has just been threatened. Your bank account's been emptied, and you're going into hiding with your family. And I'll take them out of the exercise for a while, at least for the wall clock, right? The game clock, they could be offline for several days, right, or even a week or something, just to make sure that we expose that you need depth of bench on these decision-making capabilities.
Yeah. Yeah. No, totally agree. And I think the hardest thing for so many people is to live in the exercise, as you're well aware, and pulling people out. I would say that's the hardest thing. So I am the incident commander for our enterprise crisis playbooks, for people who are familiar with the term. And this making sure all voices are heard and all the because there's always these overpowering personalities that show up, or there's often this deferral to the CEO, which is that's like one of the worst mistakes people can make, because the CEO is not the best person to make all the decisions. They're important for some. And so I think those are the kind of things that tabletops really ferret out. And I think getting that score on everyone in the room on how they did, like, you were overpowering and you didn't give people an opportunity. And more importantly, we made bad mistakes because you didn't, right? You didn't look at the whole problem, or, you weren't willing to make the life decision, the life safety choice. Your HR, you have to make that, like, the same thing on the animals. Is it a HR choice or is it a finance choice? Right. It's
Yeah,
certainly
so
not.
you're shipping turtles and dogs out of Puerto Rico?
Well, no. No one cares about turtles, but dogs for sure. No, just kidding. But
I
it was
know.
that kind of conversation, right? Like I mean, they're real issues. Like, again, and you have to be again, back to this comment about make sure you recognize global and community impact. Like when we were doing COVID, and I'm looking at badging data around the world, in 48 hours, we go to a 97% remote workforce. And part of the reason why, yeah, hang on a sec. Yeah, what do we have? Like 4 minutes? Okay, that's great. Sorry guys, and people. Sorry, I meant that as a non-gender based term. The the Sorry, I lost my
Like
train.
granular decision about turtles and dogs and
Oh yeah, turtles and dogs. This idea of acting globally, like when we were doing the COVID stuff, and so we had these systems that we were checking for a lot. Like we had to, as much as we want to care about all the things that are happening, we also have productivity like anybody else. So for us, productivity is are you doing pull requests and check-ins on code? So I'm monitoring to see if people are still working remotely or still checking in code or going
right.
into buildings and checking to go into buildings. wasn't that we wanted them there, we didn't want them there. And we were finding places where people were still going in. So there's this, hey, we're contacting the managers because clearly we have a cultural issue with some managers not letting people work remotely. But that wasn't the case. In Asia, when you have a very small living space and 2 children at home and 2 people at home, it was really hard. So for
That's your
people,
refuge, actually. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And so that idea of remember to think globally in those scenarios, and the same thing with what my comment, like some families, it's very common for grandparents to live in the house, and some families, in some areas, it's not. So, being aware of those things is, again, all the tabletops teach you those things.
Well, that's great.
Hey,
Go ahead, Juan.
yeah, Brett, I want to give you a chance since you only have about 5 minutes left. Tell us about your new role at Microsoft. I know it's much more
The new role.
expensive. Yeah, exactly. So I want to make sure people
The new role is
understand.
to make sure I beat you on the tennis court, which
That's
is
right. So that's one thing I always wonder. What is the new role? And how is it going to help CISOs in the long term?
it's interesting. I'm hopeful it will help. I've sort of been involved with the CISO role, having a voice in it evolving from being a role. If you think of the old Norman Rockwell picture of the accountant with the visor on upside down, sitting at a desk with a lamp on it, into the role a CFO plays today, which is amazing business leader, not a back office, bean counter, whatever, pejorative term that might have been used. And CISO is similar. Like, it was a big technologist type role. For one point, CISO was really a cryptographer. And my background came from technology, but we've helped evolve the role, both in terms of how it reports, where it reports. Like my role was pulled out of IT and made actually above the CIO, probably 8 years ago. And that doesn't mean it's the right thing, because it depends on the organization and the culture. But the more important thing was changing the role to sort of be on these 4 axes of, there is a technical component, there is the business enablement part that you have to go drive, there is the risk management side you have to go drive, and then there's your operational excellence. And I'm always operating at any time where, if like you're in a new business, you may take more risk, right? Because you're trying to move a bit forward. You just have to make sure we're transparent on what those things are. Or if I'm farther down in a maturity cycle, like in my SOX today, they're really, really driving all around operational efficiencies and operational excellence. And so, but I think the next transition for the CISO role is going to be, because of all the regulation that's coming into play and all the awareness around the role. I think the industry has to rally a bit to make sure that we're providing. Let me put it differently. There's a need, like there was 20 years ago, for how we better secure box product. There is a need to think about what's the better way to scale how you secure systems today that are in an agile development world, where every company is a technology company that doesn't have technologists per se in those companies, in a world where cloud is critical. And then those are all things that are already happening, but then you add AI as a platform. Right. And so instead of being like the security people who were standing in front of VMware, 18 years ago and saying, oh, no, slow, it was like really watching a CISO picking up 2 nickels in front of a steamroller. Like, we sort of need to get ahead and put it into the model of how do we need to change the way security actually works fundamentally. So we need a different way to build software and services. We need a much better way to respond, a little bit to the tabletop exercise, but how do you respond more quickly and more transparently, because CVEs and cloud service providers are very different than when you patch them yourselves. And so there's 2 ends of the spectrum: better build, better response, with identity at the core of everything we do, which needs to be some pretty big enhancements around how identity works. And so my role going forward, like where I get energy, is working on moving forward the things we need to prepare for what's coming. And so instead of being caught in the operational grind, which I've been doing for a long time, which I love, I really want to go focus on those things. So I'll be spending a lot of time helping. The biggest, like if I look at what I was focused on in my role, I had the 4 Rs, which were Russia, ransomware, recessionary headwinds, and regulatory environment. The regulatory environment could cripple a lot of what the benefits and values of all the compute stuff we've built. So I'll spend a lot of time, not just DC, but globally, trying to help make sure that we make an environment that CISOs can still thrive in.
Great. So you're going to have to come to our January webinar then, because that one's going to be about regulatory and the changes from NYDFS and from the SEC, and the FTC slipped in some changes to their rules while everyone was watching the prosecution of Tim Brown, that's
Yeah,
beginning. And so,
I have a call with Tim tonight, I think, and there's a lot of work. I won't say, I'll just say, just watch what's happening in the next 8 weeks and the things we're gonna go do to help Tim. But I'm not, as much as I like Tim, and for those of you who don't know, Tim was the CISO at SolarWinds. As much as I like, and I think we were one of the first calls, we helped them when that whole situation happened, but it's less about the individual and more about the profession, because I'm worried about is if people don't want to be in the profession, or I believe there should be better transparency. I believe the SEC has a right to make sure that investors are, properly informed in the decisions they make. How they're going about it, I don't agree with. And what I think it may be counterproductive, which is people will want to share less, not more. And the best people who are in the space may not want to be in the space anymore, which is a double bad thing for the
yeah.
realm at large. So, yeah, so I have a lot of passion, and to do that takes a lot of time away from the operational work that I was doing here. And so I said, I really want to go work on this. Sadly, I think the press is split. Some people understand it, some people don't. I don't really give a crap about what the press says, but this is my, I mean, I care. I should be a little more, I care. But this was my plan from a while ago. So I was excited about the changes. And in fact, I'm just doing the leadership transition team work now. So thanks.
Well, that's great. So thank you for raising the average tenure of the CISO upwards from your 14 years, right? Because the rest of us are looking at 18 months, right? So
yeah. I know, like I said, maybe I stayed too long, or maybe I should have stayed longer. I don't really know. I turned the role down 3 years before. I said I would never do it, but I also turned Microsoft down in '87. So you probably shouldn't follow my financial or career advice. But no, I'm glad I did both of them, because I had a set of experiences working for a Fortune 20 company that to this day I still leverage from what's it like to be on the receiving end of some of these things.
yeah.
And even not taking the CISO role, I was a CTO for the product delivery, which makes me a better person to help us build better products. So yeah, I'm very happy. I'm super fortunate. And there's nothing we've done perfectly. But my list of things I wished I'd done better is much longer. I think every day in the role, and now in this role, I find out that all I really learning is that I know less than I knew last year. And so at the rate I'm going at, in about 10 years, it'll be official. I know absolutely nothing. And my 18-year-old daughter will now be honestly true that her dad knows nothing. So that's the I'm on.
You'll be doing the Benjamin Buttons on us. Yeah. Well,
Exactly.
Thank you so much for sharing the time. I know you've got to go and talk to 1,000 people about the future, but really great to have you on the call, and look forward to following your advocacy to stop CISOs from being thrown under the bus by these well-intentioned regulatory changes.
No, I appreciate it. And I love that you're doing this tabletop topic. I think it's just, yeah, it's righteous work that people should really, I think, should pay attention to. Having an independent entity like you all doing it, like that's probably the biggest value. I went and checked my data on who I use and how much I pay.
Yeah.
You guys are a lot less expensive than what I'm paying.
Yes.
So.
Well, we're trying to address the needs of the mid-market. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
you're a Fortune 20, so you can afford whatever. Most companies.
No, I don't have that kind of budget. But thank you so much for the time. I appreciate the opportunity. Good luck, everyone.
Thanks, Bret.
Thanks,
Take
Bret.
care.
All right, let's see. So I have Google Chrome ready to share. Where did that tab go? Hang on a second. All right. There, I'm ready. All right, so let's jump back into it. That was a great bit of insight and storytelling from someone who has been around a long time, and we can all learn from. And appreciate the fact that he's moving into a more outward-facing, I guess, function with all of his influence. He'll be able to do a lot of good things for us all. All right, so what is the tabletop exercise? So this is the too long did not read piece. What is a tabletop? It helps elevate cybersecurity risks, at least when you run a cyber scenario, to executives. It's a modest investment of time and cost. It's usually half a day or a couple of hours, depending on how many scenarios and how involved you want to get. It generates momentum for the remediation of gaps. So I like to think you work backwards from what you want the lessons learned slide in the deck to deliver. and then you build the scenario and the whole exercise for that. And I'll talk about that in a minute. It also counts as a BCP-DR activity for compliance. So doing one of these once a year, I like to do them every quarter for the company, companies that I work with. And don't reinvent the wheel. Borrow the templates from CISA and from CIS, and I have links for those in the slides, and everyone can have a copy of the slides. Don't worry about taking screenshots or notes because I'll share the full slides with speaker notes with you. And then, of course, demonstrate the importance of depth of bench. And I said, like, name delegates, what we talked about, right? Pull one of the people off the table during the exercise. So a good tabletop exercise should have two main effects, right? The participants become alarmed about their lack of preparedness because you're trying to test your incident response capabilities and knowledge. And yet you want them to also feel empowered to take action to mitigate the risks that have been identified in the exercise. So I expect a budget around 10K per hour for a one scenario session or more, depending on the scope, number of attendees. So quick agenda for the remainder of our time. The basics of tabletops, scenario selection and tailoring, invitations and scheduling, delivery of the exercise, and then lessons learned. So who has been witness to a breach event? Anyone here been involved in a breach? Feel free to come off mute and say yes, or raise your hand with the buttons on the Zoom. Has anyone participated in a tabletop exercise before? Juan, did you have any tabletops?
Not really.
No, okay.
No.
Well, looks like Keisha's been through it. I was just actually participating in, and George, I was just participating in the Sector New York U.S. Coast Guard tabletop exercise. I was invited to be an observer and an evaluator, and that was a great experience. I learned a lot about the Coast Guard and their processes, and they're only just starting to figure out cyber. And if your company has never done a tabletop like this before, that's okay. There's a lot of people in that place, in that space as you, and you just have to begin. You don't have to do it perfectly the first time. The average IBM, I think, said the average IBM 2022 average cost of a data breach was like 4.5 million. So you really kind of want to spend a little bit of money getting ready for boom, like we said, and not just running around like chickens with your heads cut off when it happens. And what percentage of that, is actual the ransomware payment, right? There's 15% of that is the actual ransomware payment. 85% is paid for lawyers and incident response and identity monitoring and all sorts of other things, outside crisis management teams. So I got some stats and links for you in the slides. So tabletop, what is a tabletop? Basically, an experienced facilitator walks you through different learning points ahead of time, and it facilitates a conversation. And you play it out with a wall clock, that might be an hour or 2 or 4. And then the game clock, right, which is how long the scenario takes, which could be a month, it could be a week, it could be 2 months, it could be even longer. And you need to include other business units. And so you're essentially playing a game of Wheel of Misfortune, right, which is actually a Google server and site reliability engineering term. Training for a security incident ahead of time, it's unquestionably a good thing for the security function. Scenario selection and tailoring. What kind of an exercise should you run? CIS, the Center for Internet Security, has 6 example tabletops that you can just download, and they have the templates, and they have all the information you need. So you don't have to cook that up yourself, right? There's not a lot of creation required. And CISA has their tabletop exercise packages as well, CTEPs, for critical infrastructure, as well as other industries. And they have different scenarios that you can choose from. So when I want to get budget for a previous company I worked at for mobile device management, I wanted to get a solution that was able to do good mobile device management. I created a really lovely tabletop scenario where a personal mobile device was taken over so that MFA was bypassed, right? Multi-factor authentication. And the threat actors then sent malicious PDF files to their customers. And so this is a business email compromise kind of scenario as well. And similarly, very established VIP laptops, and backups, that was another outcome that I wanted to achieve, which was we really don't want certain VIPs laptops to be ransomwared because they may have the only copy of a certain document on it because they may not be doing backups. And so I wanted to make sure that we introduce that as a scenario and a lesson learned. And of course, business sensitive data, doesn't always have to just be PII. It can be anything, strategic plans and documents, intellectual property. So there's all sorts of scenarios that can be included in tailoring a ransomware scenario. Who got hit with the ransomware and what was on the device? Invitations and scheduling. So tabletop exercises are not just for engineers, right? You need to invite everyone who should be involved in the scenario if you think it through. So elements of an effective tabletop exercise, of course, preparing for the exercise. Too many organizations are running very limited tabletops with their incident response team in attendance, and that's it. But remember that someone needs to declare an event, or to declare an incident, or to declare a breach. Or a data spillage, if the lawyers have their way. They don't like to use the word breach. They like to talk about a data leakage or something. And of course, escalated and then worked through all the way to remediation. So HR could be involved, legal, like I said, outside counsel, you may need to invite to the tabletop so that they can understand what the incident response plan is and when they're brought in to make those decisions. Like Bret was saying, who's going to decide to say what and when? So make sure you highlight the possibilities that an incident took place a few weeks ago, but no one knew about it. And then afterwards, additional events and anomalies are detected. So make sure that you have an inject, as it's called, in your scenario where you say, oh, by the way, the real event happened like, 3-4 months ago, because there's a lot of dwell time involved in breaches and incidents. And people always find out that their signals had been missed, right? The incident response team after the incident comes in and they say, oh yeah, this is the signal that you missed. This was the actual initial compromise and the patient zero, right, of the outbreak of the attack. And it wasn't escalated or it was ignored. And that, of course, is an important part and lesson learned and takeaway from a good exercise. Sometimes they even find evidence during an actual incident response investigation of being breached by 2 or even 3 threat actors at the same time. And they're sometimes fighting each other to push each other out. So like the Russians have malware that detects the malware of the Chinese and tries to uninstall the Chinese malware. And the Chinese malware is trying to uninstall the North Koreans or the Russians malware. And so it's not uncommon for, like I said, a vulnerable asset to be breached by more than one threat actor at the same time. Typical TTX format for the agenda is start with the agenda. You tell them what's going to happen, but don't tell them before the event. Don't tell them what the scenario is. Just know that they've been invited and they have to send a delegate if they can't make it themselves. Because if you need a legal person on there and at the last minute the legal person is like on holiday or sick or something and can't make it or has another meeting, they're going to have to send a delegate because you're going to need someone representing the legal decision-making arm of your organization. Then you want to talk about some of the tabletop exercise goals, ground rules, aka don't fight the scenario. Right? A lot of people are like, that could never happen, or oh no, that would never happen. That's not the way we respond. Try to take pictures of their vulnerability management and dashboards, and then modify them to look like a real scenario, right? Don't just use words, use pictures. Then, of course, run the scenario, and then do the lessons learned and debriefing. And so the delivery is actually the fun part, right? You've already won if you reach game day, as it's called. When everyone shows up, your scenario is well designed, and you're rewarding attendance, with maybe some vendor swag, right? Maybe Salesforce sent you some winter hats, right? Or mouse pads or pens. Hand that out to the people and share the swag. Right? As a security officer, I get sent this stuff all the time from Slack or from IBM or other companies. And it's always nice, of course, to have free food. That helps people show up for the event if it's going to be done in person. And if it's going to be done remotely, then give them a $20, $25 Uber Eats gift card, right? And voucher that they can use to order lunch. And that way you get good participation. Then the lessons learned section. Is it clear who's responsible for what? So after you do the scenario and you have the injects and you have the sequence of events that lead to a bad day, you want to have questions on the slides that say, okay, did you contact the insurance provider, right? Sometimes you can't file a claim with your insurance provider if you don't notify them within a certain number of hours. And that could be a non-payment of a claim then, and you're out potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not more, because you didn't realize that that was a part of the scenario. That was a part of the process of responding to an incident, and everyone needs to know it. Do you know what you can do now to prepare for them? This is what we talked about before. Write up like 5 or 6 press releases for 5 or 6 different scenarios now, and get legal and HR and anyone else that has to approve of such a press release for communications to approve it ahead of time, and just know that the only thing that might change would be the date, right? Because you're not going to reveal a lot of detail, but you do want to own the narrative, because if you don't, the street will write the narrative for you, aka the internet, and they're not going to be kind. Just like Bret was saying, there's people saying awful things about him elevated to this new role, as opposed to, what is the real story and what do people think the story is, and they're going to invent stuff. And of course, rumors are worse, than the truth, and you don't want to help spread rumors. So you got to own that narrative and get out there, right away. And then the benefits of running a regular tabletop exercise, that should be a takeaway from the lessons learned as well. They say, oh, we should do one of these, for the legal team, for a lawsuit by a customer or something, right? And people can start, see the light bulb going, and see their mind starting to think about, oh yeah, this is actually helpful for us to do what we call a pre-mortem, as Bret mentioned as well. I love the fact that he used that word. NASA came up with it. How will this mission fail? It's not a post-mortem, right? You're thinking about the failure of the mission and the project and the launch and the event ahead of time. So anyway, you should write up those scenario outcomes before the tabletop is delivered, and then see if you got them right, and see if everyone who attended hit the same lessons learned that you hoped for in designing the scenario and the exercise. So what takeaways do you want them to identify during the scenario? What injects will force someone to write something down, say, oh, I need to check on that. I don't know what our insurance policy says in terms of notification timeline for a breach event, or a notification for law enforcement of payment of ransomware or something like that. NYDFS, the Department of Financial Services, for over 3,000 covered entities here in New York in the financial services sector, just passed changes to Part 500, which says that you have to declare ransomware payment within 24 hours. So if you're under their requirements, that's something new, and that just went into effect December 1st. And then, of course, on a per team basis, what are the action items, right? So what is HR going to take away as their action item from the tabletop? What is legal going to take away? What is the finance team going to take away? The finance team is a good target, right? Because you have spreadsheets, and you have all sorts of sensitive business information on their laptops. What is DevOps going to do to improve monitoring, perhaps, or to ability to quarantine a device automatically once it triggers from your endpoint detection? What is the marketing team going to take away? aka write all of your press releases now. Public relations team, that can be separate from marketing, right? So anyway, work backwards from the aha moments and build the scenarios to ensure that they happen for the participants. And that's why you create, like I said, a tailored scenario. So you start with one of these templates, but you then customize it and make it real for your participants. So it's not just a hypothetical what if discussion. You need to create the business justification for the remediation project that you want to see emerge as a result of the exercise. And that's why I think that it's useful to obviously spend time talking with the organization. I like to talk to them and say, okay, what is it you want that you really need that you're not getting? And let's build a tabletop to help make it happen. So what tabletop basics? Here we've got a decision-based exercise, right? For personnel to meet and validate the contents of their incident response plan. Some people don't even know where the incident response plan is. What if the incident response plan is hosted on Confluence, and guess what? Confluence is down, right? You need to make sure you have a copy of that plan somewhere else, on a GitHub repo, or on a 3-ring binder, even printed out in an office somewhere. That you want everyone to discuss their roles and responsibilities during an emergency and their response to a particular scenario. And the facilitator initiates this discussion and sits around and waits for them to make the appropriate realizations before moving on to the next slide. Tabletop setup. So designate a single facilitator, break it into meaningful learning points. So write up some notes on how you're going to structure the scenario before you build it. Then read the scenario out loud to the group, and then you facilitate the discussion on how to handle the scenario. And you want to include applicable members. You want to call on the quiet people and ask them, so what are you doing at this point during the incident? Maybe it's the head of DevOps, or maybe it's the help desk. Maybe the help desk is going crazy with calls from customers, right? And of course, include these people from these other business units. So I think most organizations are not really ready to run a tabletop exercise themselves the first time around. So that's why you procure the talent of a security vendor. When I was at ASCAP, I brought in Raytheon to do our first tabletop. And then everyone was like, wow, that was great. Let's do some more. But we don't want to pay that full, huge price. So we're going to learn how to do it ourselves. And that's good, right? Because, you can use different vendors. You don't always have to go to the same one to provide those tabletops. You get a different perspective and feel for it when you rotate vendors. But it will provide a good example of how it's done well. And, then, like I said, you want to start off with a ransomware. Most people should do a ransomware tabletop at least once a year and just verify that everyone knows what tools do we use, how do we quarantine a device, how do we notify, how do we recover. If you lost 100 laptops and you only have 100 laptops, how do you buy 100 new laptops, right, to get everyone back in the air? Because you're not going to just go and try to do a wipe and reinstall of the device, because the malware could be resident still, right? It could be in the boot prompt. It could be a rootkit that persists. So you really can't trust that. So you may end up walking to the Apple store and buying like 20 MacBook Pros on a given day, right? And do you have a credit card that can handle buying 20 MacBook Pros on a given day to get the business, back up and running? The prospect of it being, experienced for ransomware is quite high. A lot of people are getting hit, and the response time and mitigation techniques are important to identify and get prepared ahead of time. This visual I put on here is just theater blocking notation symbols, and so I was just thinking about some way to visualize this idea that you're orchestrating a dance between the executives and the individual contributors of the team, and you want to have a certain drama play out on the stage. This book, by the way, does not exist. This was a for Dummies generator webpage, and so I created tabletop exercise for dummies. So when I gave this presentation previously to a bunch of CISOs, they're like, "Oh, where do I get the link for that book?" I was like, "Sorry, I didn't. I guess maybe I should write it." But anyway, what kind of an exercise should you run? And like I said, CIS has a bunch of exercises you can download. I've got the hyperlinks in here. You can get them by asking for a copy of the slides, or you can just go Google it. CIS, the Center for Internet Security, they have 6 tabletop exercises that you can use as well. Packages, communications, lessons learned, template. What I thought was really good about the Coast Guard event that I went to on Staten Island was a great scenario, and they actually used the CIS template. And I applauded them for that. I was like, yeah, don't invent that wheel. It's already been invented. Go and copy the template. These are some of the scenarios that they have for CIS. The quick fix. So somebody makes a change on a Friday and then they jump on a plane to go on holiday and everything goes to hell and no one else knows how to fix it, right? So you have a single point of failure, like a network administrator or SharePoint administrator or identity and access management administrator, and they make some little change and they don't think it's going to break everything, but guess what? It does, and no one knows how to fix it. And then there's the malware infection. The scenario they also have is unplanned attack. They have a cloud compromise scenario. They have a financial break-in where someone just breaks into your office and steals physical computers. That's why you have full device encryption turned on your mobile device management. And if you don't, now you get that aha moment saying, oh yeah, someone could actually break into the office and steal the computers. And if the data on them is not encrypted, guess what? All of your financials are going to be on the street. And then the flood zone is kind of like the scenario, natural disaster or pandemic. So we don't have time to go through all of them. I just wanted you to know that these are all free and well written. And the CTEPs, these are pre-built exercises and templates, vetted scenarios to assess, develop, and update information, sharing, emergency response plans, programs. And every company will be improved by doing 1 or more tabletops per year. And their downtime and their disruption from a attack or a scenario or an event will be lessened by going through the tabletop. And so, like I said, these are intended for critical infrastructure such as dams and water treatment and power generation. But really, the handbooks are really useful for everyone else as well. Tailoring a ransomware scenario, include correct department names. That's what I mean by tailoring it. If you use semantic, show it. Or if you use Carbon Black or CrowdStrike, show what the dashboard would look like. Mock up an infection by just changing the numbers from 0 infected machines to like 100 or something. Just copy and paste, Photoshop or something. Select a real ransomware family or strain. Don't just invent something. Think of something that could actually hit the company that you're talking to and the company you're working in. Invent a threat actor who publishes on Twitter, or formerly known as Twitter, and has a valid reason to attack you, right? So go for like a hacktivist scenario. Maybe you are, the GOP or the Democratic National Convention, all of which have been attacked and breached recently. And then include a second attack where they do data exfiltration, because that's always like the last inject is like, oh, by the way, 400 gigabytes of your data is now for sale in the dark web. So you may have solved the ransomware attack and got things back up and running, but the whole extortion play of exfiltrating data is a huge part of ransomware attacks these days. Create a mock bleeping computer news page or a CNN headline and put your company into that web page to make them really get immersed in the possibility of this happening. Failing that moment of owning the comms of the breach event is what causes extended damage. All right, a couple more slides left and about 5 minutes. So tabletop exercises are not just for engineers, right? Senior leadership team, human resources, legal, marketing, finance, IT, DevOps. One of my favorite scenarios was a lawsuit, because the ability to apply what's called a preservation order or a hold for all records involving a set of company officers and technical roles could be related to a subpoena. Does the organization even have the ability to create a matter, right, as it's called, in Google Vault or an equivalent tool? Do you have a digital forensics and e-discovery tool that can block the deletion of emails and documents? Because even draft documents are considered records that have to be maintained and preserved if you're sued. So the lawsuit scenario, like I said, is really good to get everyone thinking about these capabilities that you may not even have. What are the retention periods? You don't want the logs and the email accounts for someone who got let go, who's been named in one of these subpoenas, because the lawsuit might take 4 or 5 years, right, before it comes to trial. And your retention policy might be 18 months after they leave. And so you don't want to be in trouble by deleting data. So you need to make sure you have a handle on that. Effective tabletop exercises include a free lunch. I usually go for, like I said, noontime Eastern. That way I capture people on the East Coast who can have, or West Coast that can have breakfast. Bring in some nice vendor swag, a Moleskine notebook, a cross pen, things that have been given to you by people, or ask your vendors to provide them. And then, of course, reserve the big swanky boardroom. Let everyone who's been invited to this in-person event feel like royalty and feel important, because they are. It's not just the executives that get to sit in the big swanky boardroom or equivalent. And then, of course, you need a wall TV and monitor to display the injects and the questions, and like an hour for one scenario. So maybe start at 11 o'clock on Friday, have lunch, and then do another scenario afterwards. And preparing. So keep the scenario topic secret. Send everyone a copy of the SIRP, the Security Incident Response Plan, ahead of time so they can study it. Print out the participant slides and leave room on those printouts for notes and doodling. Executives love to doodle on the corner of their printouts whenever they're in the meeting, and it helps exercise their brains. It's like a fidget spinner. It helps them actually be attentive and to listen. And bring tactiles, like I said, fidget spinners themselves and puzzles, useful for different types, OCD types, people that are on the spectrum that might be on your team. They will have a much better time of it if they have some of these toys around. And then use peer pressure to prevent last-minute no-shows, and have each attendee name a delegate in case they have a legitimate reason to not participate. And of course, like I said, everyone wants to feel like a white glove VIP that's coming in for this thing. And, the individual team contributors, the help desk, they're the ones that really make a difference in protecting a company, having good, quick, early awareness, and getting things resolved. Your tabletop should generally follow this format. Like I said, agenda, goals, ground rules, scenario. And I can dive into those quickly. Intro, 5 minutes, scenario walkthrough, 40 minutes of the hour, 15 minutes for lessons learned, lunch for an hour, and then send them home or do a second scenario. You can run shorter ones, but that's basically the minimum. And it should follow this, like I said, pre-mortem. You should socialize and execute the incident response plan ahead of time. Make sure everyone knows what their roles are. And how will your company or project fail? You want to ask them, in a follow-up, and have them submit that information afterwards. So do a poll, right? Do a survey. Was it good? Did you feel it was a good use of your time? Would you like to do another one? That kind of thing. Generally, the ground rules don't fight the scenario. The in-game clock is different from the wall clock. Facilitators may state certain personnel become unavailable. That's what I talked about with Bret. Take the CTO off the table. Take the CEO off the table and say, your life has been threatened. You can't, run the scenario and be a part of it anymore because someone knows where you live and you have to go into hiding or something, right? So we're not killing someone like Bret talked about, but we're taking them out of the scenario. You want to pull someone who's causing or going to expose a single point of failure where there is no depth of bench. There's no one with that knowledge, with the authority to take a decision if that person's gone. Like I said, let's say that their bank account's been emptied, their children or their spouse has been threatened with violence, and so that's going to weaken the organization. And guess what? This actually happens. It's been happening a lot in the defense industrial base lately, actually. They're going for contractors and threatening their families. The scenario, talking points, then an inject, then you have talking points, and then a slide of questions, and then an additional inject, right? And then you have the conclusion. So it's always nice, like I said, to have a reveal slide where you do pairs of slides where you have questions, and then they talk about them, and then the next slide is your expected answers to those questions. That's a nice format for it. And then, of course, wrapping up, lessons learned. You want to capture their first impressions and reactions, and you want to score people and provide a meaningful report. Debriefing questions. What did we learn? What went well? What went wrong? In the delivery of the tabletop, but also in people's response to the scenario. Who should have been involved? Who didn't have a role? Did everyone actually follow the plan? Create what we call an after-action report. The after-action report should be drafted and sent to all the participants, and it should contain an executive summary. Again, the too long did not read for the people that never get past the cover page of a document. That's aka your executive audience. And then you let them provide some feedback and then produce the final version. And so, like I said, you want to have different objectives, backups, mobile device monitoring, setting up a SOC, a security operations center, whatever it is you want to try to achieve by hosting, the tabletop. And of course, is it clear who's responsible for what? Incident response plan document owner, incident response managers, escalation to the board. Who's going to call the board members to get their opinion if they're going to have to declare and publish to the SEC or other entities in law enforcement and cyber insurance. And then lastly, I think just one more slide. Some of the benefits of running regular tabletop exercises is it sheds light on how prepared your organization is, and it raises the bar. You're building muscle memory for staff and executives so that when an actual event happens, it won't be, like I said, chaos. And improving your organization's readiness to combat a data breach. Checking if your incident response plans are actually fit for purpose. Maybe your incident response plan says, make sure that you turn on, this particular backup tool. And guess what? You don't use that backup tool anymore, right? So it helps keep documentation and standard operating procedures up to date as well. And then evaluating if management, key decision makers actually know their roles and responsibilities. Like Bret said, don't let everyone defer to the CEO. Try to use this exercise to teach people to think about group process, right? It's not just about kowtowing to the CEO and to their opinion. And so I have an appendix and I talk a little bit about some examples. And of course you can ask for, and we will send you the slides. And I also have a 56 US state and territory breach notification requirement spreadsheet as an added takeaway. And of course it's out of date the moment you make it because these laws change every year or every few months. States decide, 10 days, 5 days, 72 hours. But anyway, that was my presentation on delivering effective tabletop exercises. And if you have any questions, Juan put my email there in the chat. Happy to talk with you about doing this or a risk assessment or any other types of things. But if you do want to hang around for another minute or two, any questions or comments from you all gathered here today? Feel free to come off mute. And of course, download our lovely background if you want a festive holiday Zoom background. I used generative AI to produce it. If you can see over here, this street lamp is hanging off of a tree limb. And so AI knows that there should be street lamps in a winter scene. It just doesn't know what it is and why it shouldn't be attached to a tree.
Mike, one thing that I got from Bret's presentation is the importance of having a third party conduct a tabletop exercise. I mean, obviously, Microsoft has plenty of CISOs internally, and they use a third party to help the executive team go through the phases. Why do you think that's so important?
I think this has to do with impartiality. The vendor who's delivering the tabletop, in this case, we'd like to think he'd want us to do it since we're good at it, is impartial and is not going to be favoritive, or avoiding stepping on someone's toes or wounding someone when there's political battles. So let's say that there's not a good relationship between a couple of people and teams and departments. And if you have the CISO run it, then some of those biases, and attacks may be considered ad hominem, right? Personal attacks. And so it's useful to have a third party to do it for the impartiality. And also just because then the CISO gets to be a participant and to not be the person running the scenario. Teacher, hi, how are you doing?
Good afternoon. Thanks for having this. This was really informative for me. I've only participated in a workshop that I was a participant in a SERP, so or a tabletop game, and I thought it was fun because we had to come up with money that attached to the scenario, and then we ran out of money really fast, which was something, and so yeah, I really like the tabletop exercises. My question is, is there any examples of like reporting after it? Like, does the person, I was thinking about going around doing it for, small, medium businesses. And is there any type of report example after the tabletop exercise that I can?
Yeah, let me pull up that slide or get myself to the page. Basically, the CISA and the CIS packages contain all the documents you would need, including the after action report, so that you can follow that as a format or a template. So let's see, here we go. And of course, if you want to make your own for dummies images, I have the generator URL in this paste into the chat. So the CIS exercises, actually that one might be a broken hyperlink, but anyway, it's in the slides. Send me your email, request a copy of the slides, and then you'll have the proper hyperlink. But yeah, it's definitely a very valuable use of time and money to do this what if thinking. And I don't know if anyone's had personal experience on the call as to how expensive ransomware can be, but certainly you can use the fact that everyone's getting hit. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when and how often and how hard and how long you're going to be down and how much it's going to cost and how quickly you can stand back up. And so ransomware, like I said, everyone's first choice for the first scenario to run for a tabletop. But there's lots of other ones like insider risk. There's like I said, some of the scenarios that are in those hyperlinks. Very useful to see if I can copy this link better. Copy link address, paste. Yeah, that one's a full hyperlink. I don't know why it decided to break them up. Copy link address, I'll paste it again. And then the for dummies generator. Yeah, you can use that for all sorts of fun reasons, right? Visiting family for the holidays for dummies, send it around. But anyway, I want to be cognizant of time. I actually have to go and have a doctor's appointment and check and see if I have the flu because I've been feeling poor. My voice is a little bit nasal. So I need to shut down the call and get on my way. But thanks everyone for joining who was here today, and great thanks to Bret for coming on and sharing his experience during his busy time as CISO at Microsoft. I think in January is when he starts his new role, right, Juan?
Yeah. Well,
And for those of you on the recording, oh, you totally missed it. You should have been on here. You know, you could have asked a question. But feel free to come back again with questions after you watch this. And we're happy to help figure out if we can help you execute a tabletop or do a risk assessment or talk with you in general about your plans for your security. Cool. Thanks, Keisha. Thanks, everyone.
thanks, Mike.
And there's stop.